Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up this hour. At least 100 people killed during a blaze at a wedding in Iraq. Russian main opposition leader Alexei Navalny loses appeal against a 19-year-old prison term added to his sentence last month. Plus, Travis King, the U.S. soldier who fled to North Korea in July, said to be in American custody after being expelled by Pyongyang. The World Today starts right now. Let's begin in Serbia, where Kosovo police have continued to keep up their guard on a road leading to the village of Banjska 3 days after a deadly shootout as investigations continued at the scene. Kosovo authorities say around 30 heavily armed Serbs stormed Banjska on Sunday, battling police and barricading themselves into a Serbian Orthodox monastery. Police recaptured the monastery late on Sunday after 3 attackers and 1 police officer were killed. The violence has prompted new international concern over stability in Kosovo, which has an ethnic Albanian majority and declared independence from Serbia in 2008 after a guerrilla uprising and a 1999 NATO intervention. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack or explained the motives behind it. Now, in Russia, a judge has refused to approve an appeal against a 19-year-old prison term added to the sentence of Russian main opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The 47-year-old Navalny is by far the best-known figure in Russia's splintered opposition, with supporters casting him as a Nelson Mandela-style figure who will be one day freed from jail to lead the country. The proceedings were closed to the media, apart from reading of the verdict, despite protests from his lawyers. His political movement has been outlawed, and its key figures have been jailed or fled abroad as part of a Kremlin crackdown on dissent that has intensified since President Putin sent his troops into Ukraine last year. Now we bring you a story of this horrifying story of a wedding, a beautiful event it was supposed to be, that turned into a disaster in Iraq's Niger province. At least 113 people have been killed and more than 150 others injured, and authorities are still counting the casualties. Initial reports indicated that fireworks used during the celebration may have been the cause of the fire.
A night of celebration turned into a nightmare in Iraq. More than 100 people burned to death after a fire broke out in a wedding hall in the predominantly Christian town of Karakash in Nineveh, east of Mosul. The blaze reportedly broke out after fireworks were lit inside the hall, and flammable panels may have fueled the flames, causing parts of the ceiling to catch fire and fall. Injured victims have been transferred to hospitals across the Nineveh region. This eyewitness recounts her ordeal. She says the blaze started while the bride and groom were slow dancing.
This wedding had over 1,000 or 1,100 guests. The wedding was going well. They were slow dancing, and then there were fireworks. One of the fireworks hit the ceiling, so the ceiling was completely on fire suddenly. The hall was all in cork material and cloth, so the ceiling was falling on people, and no one could leave.
Rescue workers continue to pick through the rubble to find survivors or more bodies, as even relatives search hospitals for missing family members. It's unclear the status of the bride and groom, as there are conflicting reports of their condition. Some families could not find their relatives among the casualties because some of their bodies were charred by the fire. This man screaming, "Where's my mom?" after finding his mother's charred dress. Nine people employed at the venue have been arrested, and warrants for the arrest of 4 others have been issued. Dozens of countries have offered condolences to Iraq and families of the victims of this tragedy. The Syria Catholic Archdiocese of Mosul has announced burial ceremonies, even as Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shah al-Sudani has declared 3 days of national mourning.
A tragic event indeed. The VOA's Edward Uranian is monitoring that story for us. Edward, a warm welcome to the program. This is the most terrible news ever reported from a wedding. Do we know if the bride and groom are safe?
Well, Joka, the Arab media say that they are, but I haven't seen the picture of them, so it's difficult to confirm. Also, we've heard a lot of conflicting reports, so it's not clear that you can take everything here from the media at face value. Especially the fact, I think the most glaring misinformation or lack of information, rather, was the fact that this was a Christian town, Christian wedding, and most of the victims were Christian, and most of the Arab media has not even mentioned that fact.
Quite noticeably, a lot of people were seen distraught, worrying about if their loved ones, you know, were part of those who died, part of those who were injured. Which other family members were affected by this disaster?
Well, a lot of friends were invited to the wedding, as the case in most Arab weddings, and a lot of very distant relatives attended, since this is a town where many people are related. So how closely the relatives are that were killed is difficult to say, and the exact names are not clear for many of the casualties because they were burned beyond recognition. So it's difficult to say with any certitude at this point who the victims were, although some of the people were saying that an aunt and uncle of the bride and groom were killed, but I really couldn't confirm that.
And is it common for people to use fireworks at weddings, you know, in that part of the world, especially in an enclosure? And isn't there some caution when this aspect of the decoration is being planned?
Fireworks are a very important part of weddings in the Middle East, but generally they don't use them inside buildings. And there is speculation, although I couldn't confirm it, that this could have some terrorist implications and that someone could have done it deliberately for other motives rather than just celebration. But once again, there's no confirmation. I heard some people on the scene were saying that, but once again, we'll never have any confirmation. And the Iraqis themselves are saying they're dismissing those reports off the top. So if they're dismissed,
And Edward, how are the investigations going? Will the authorities hold the wedding planner liable for this disaster, or who's going to be held responsible?
Well, clearly the easiest road or recourse for the officials, the government officials, is to accuse the person who is the owner of this hall. And he apparently was interviewed by a number of Arab stations, and he said he was turning himself in, but to the Kurdish administration, not to the Iraqi government. So clearly he fears that he's going to be a scapegoat to the Iraqi government in any venture.
Right, Edward, thanks once again.
My pleasure, Jessica.
To one of our lead stories now, as we welcome you back to the world today. Remember Travis King, The American who fled to North Korea from South Korea during a tour of the demilitarized area, North Korea has expelled him, and he is now set to be in U.S. custody as we speak. That information has been confirmed by senior U.S. administration officials who say the 23-year-old is in fact in U.S. custody. In China this time, North Korea decided to expel the American soldier who confessed that he illegally intruded into the country. They also said he admitted he fled because of inhuman treatment and racism within the U.S. military. To the U.S. proper now, where Judge Arthur Engoron of the New York State Court has ruled that former President Donald Trump committed fraud by repeatedly misrepresenting his wealth by hundreds of millions of dollars. The ruling is part of a case brought against Mr. Trump and his family business, saying that he defrauded banks and insurers for years. Mr. Trump has denied the ruling, saying he and his family, the other defendants, never committed fraud. New York Attorney General Letitia James had accused Mr. Trump, his two adult sons, and the Trump Organization of inflating the value of their properties by more than $2 billion to suit the needs of their business. The ruling resolves the key claim of fraud made in the lawsuit, meaning the trial will now focus more on a more narrow set of 6 remaining claims and determine the size of any potential penalty. The trial is scheduled to begin on October 2nd and could last until at least December this year. Meanwhile, in the U.S. House of Representatives, Speaker Kevin McCarthy is throwing his support behind a bill that would temporarily fund the government, but would come with tough border and immigration restrictions attached. Mr. McCarthy also expressed his opposition to a Senate bill that would give additional funding to Ukraine. The Senate voted 77 to 19 to begin debate on a measure that would fund the government through November 17 and includes around $6 billion for domestic disaster responses and another roughly $6 billion in aid for Ukraine. The split between the two chambers suggests the federal government is increasingly likely to enter its 4th shutdown in a decade on Sunday, a pattern of partisan gridlock that has begun to darken Wall Street's view of U.S. government credit.
So a number of members have been stopping the rule from coming up. Now we are able to get members in a better place and be able to move forward. But the great thing is, I never give up. So the deadline's not yet, and we're working. We'll work late into the night. But we've watched what's gone on, and we passed a bill that we can secure our border. We think this is an opportune time that everybody can work together. There are a number of Democratic leaders across the country that are crying out for it. Why can't we deal with the border and our emergencies too? Why is that taking? They have money already. They have enough money to carry them through for the next 45 days in Ukraine. But why does that take precedence over what's happening on the border? Why does that take precedence over the 300 families that are going to lose their loved ones every single day in America?
Let's talk to our Washington correspondent, Maria Byrd, now about these issues coming up in the news. Hello, Maria.
Hello.
So let's begin with a possibility the U.S. government could shut down by this weekend. This seems to be a recurring issue. What's the holdup now?
Yes, you are correct. This is something that we see happen, unfortunately, more often than many Americans would like. We are now in a position that we are waiting to see if before the end of tonight they may come up with a deal. Earlier, a few months back, there have been potential deals that were brokered between Democrats and Republicans. But as you just showed a clip of Senator McCarthy providing his thoughts on immigration. And so there's obviously other political factors that are being included in this bill to have a deal toward being able to carry the budget for October 1 so the government can stay open. So these immigration issues, the funding for Ukraine, as we know, is a political challenge for both the Democrats and Republicans not agreeing in those areas. So if this continues to be a part of the bill, we could potentially see no agreement being made this evening.
And what would it mean for the U.S. government to shut down this time around?
If the government shut down, you're talking about every piece of the government. So everything that we currently would need the government for, all of the museums, all of the tax offices, all the federal government agencies would be closed until the government was able to come together. The Senate was able to come together and have a bill go through that could move into law to actually reopen the government, because the government will obviously reopen for the next fiscal year on October 1. And so that is, I think, what is many Americans are concerned about, because if the government does shut down, that means that we are going to be without some core government functions for a period of time.
May I just ask from, people who are not Americans, how this works when, the government shuts down? Is it, run on a daily cash, running of the government? Why does it have to shut down, if these deals do not go through as expected?
Well, in order for the government to pay the workers that work for the government, they have to have an authorized budget. And the bill requires that a budget is authorized. And so the bill that they are at this time going back and forth on is the bill that says how much funding the government has for the upcoming year. Individuals will not get paid if the budget is not authorized, because the government will not have the authority to use those funds. So that's, I think, where we're talking about where the challenge comes. Will you still be able to go to the store? Everything else will function as normal. But as we know, the U.S. has been teetering on potentially what many economists have seen as a potential recession. And so we know that we're still dealing with inflation issues higher than many Americans would like to see interest rates. And so with the government shutdown, that would just add another layer to the already strained U.S. economy.
And how does this affect people who do not work with the, U.S. government, who does not depend on the U.S. government for their, weekly checks? The private sector, the regular people on the streets, how does this affect them?
So those who don't work for the public sector, who are working in private industry, most private industries, especially large companies, have some work with the government, whether they have contracts where they provide services to the government. So it still does impact those larger entities. Obviously, the military impacts. You think about large defense companies that work closely with the government, they would be installed for work, which then means that their employees potentially could be impacted. So everything is interconnected at some level. So this government shutdown would have, and those individuals who depend on funding from the government for whether it's insurance, for maybe other child services, would be obviously at risk and potentially not able to receive those services or those payments.
Right. So about the Trump situation now, how would Judge Engoron's ruling affect the former president's move for the presidency or affect his businesses going forward?
Well, this ruling, I think, is one that I think many of the American people are looking to see how this, as you said, will impact his campaign. What we've seen, obviously, over the past few months is that despite if he's goes before an indictment, whatever the judge's ruling is, it still has not impacted his campaign. It actually has increased his supporter base. But with stripping of his businesses and potentially not allowing him to run his various organizations and having someone to monitor, to oversee his businesses, that could put a challenge to his ability to be able to run his campaign successfully. So I think this is going to be one that could have an adverse effect on the former president. Whether or not it will reduce his supporter base, I don't know if that will happen, but it could have a challenge with the operations of his campaign.
And let's quickly move to the issue concerning Travis King, who is back in U.S. custody, having been expelled by North Korea. Will he be, court-martialed when he returns to the United States? What's going to happen to him?
That was what initially I think was anticipated prior to him illegally going into North Korea. Obviously, North Korea expelled him. He did state that he illegally went into the country. So I think that was part of what they said allowed him to be released. Now, coming back here to the U.S., previously there were potential thoughts and discussions around him being court-martialed in Texas. So we have not yet seen where that is going to end up. Obviously, the first piece was making sure that he made it back safely, and obviously being in North Korea and being detained was the first priority of the U.S. And so I think we'll have to look to see how the military will move forward in this case.
And is it possible that he was of no use to the North Koreans, which is why he was expelled in the first place?
You know, I think that's what was initially said, but I think that, you know, what we're looking at right now is, you know, he went over there illegally. He's confessed to that. And so the real question is, once he gets back, the military is doing, obviously, investigations and questioning of him to find out what his intents were and obviously what happened prior to him escaping into North Korea.
Thanks again, Maria. And we're still in the United States, but this time in Philadelphia, where more than a dozen people have been arrested after a massive group of juvenile looters ransacked businesses across the state. Local media says the chaos started around 7:30 p.m. after numerous 911 calls stated a large group, possibly as many as 100, moving through Center City. Several businesses were broken into. Police say 15 to 20 arrests have been made and also confirmed that the looting is not related to an earlier protest over the fatal police shooting of Eddie Irizarry.
At this point in time, we know somewhere around 15 to 20 arrests have taken place thus far. At least 2 firearms have been recovered during some arrests. Don't know if they're all connected to this or not. Again, I just wanted to reiterate that this had nothing to do with the protest. What we had tonight was a bunch of criminal opportunists take advantage of a situation and make an attempt to destroy our city.
Now to updates now on the killing of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Niger. The Indian government telling Canada it's now open to looking into what it says are any specific or relevant information provided on Niger. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had last week revealed that Ottawa had a credible intelligence linking Indian agents to the murder, prompting an angry initial reaction from New Delhi, which denies the allegation. India's Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar detailed New Delhi's response in diplomatic engagements after being asked about the allegation at a Council on Foreign Relations event in New York. In the meantime, diplomatic relations between the two countries remain on ice, both having expelled the ambassadors and refusing to issue visas. In other news, the United States has condemned a drone attack that killed 2 Bahraini servicemen and wounded several others in Saudi Arabia near the border with Yemen. The attack happened on Monday, September 25, according to State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. U.S. officials are in touch with Bahraini counterparts and reaffirmed support for the kingdom. Both sides in Yemen's 8-year war have accused each other of attacks that break a relative lull in fighting and jeopardize peace talks that had been gathering momentum. Yemen's Houthi movement has battled a Saudi-led coalition since 2015 that has killed hundreds of thousands and left 80% of the population dependent on aid.
We strongly condemn the September 25th attack carried out by Houthi elements on the Saudi-Yemeni border that killed 2 Bahraini service members and injured many others. This unprovoked attack threatens the longest period of calm since the war in Yemen began. U.S. officials from across our government have been in touch with Bahraini counterparts since news of the attack broke yesterday. We stand with the Kingdom of Bahrain, a longtime strategic partner of the United States, and we offer our sincere condolences to the families of the victims and to the government and people of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. We wish those injured in this unprovoked and unacceptable attack a speedy recovery and return to duty. We have worked tirelessly with our partners to de-escalate, secure a truce, and incentivize the parties to launch a Yemeni peace process. The Secretary discussed peace in Yemen in a number of his engagements with counterparts in the region last week during the United Nations General Assembly, and emphasized that only a Yemeni political agreement can durably resolve the conflict and end the humanitarian crisis.
Hollywood writers ended their strike on Wednesday after nearly 5 months on the march. The Writers Guild of America, WGA as they are called, said in a statement that union leaders voted unanimously to lift the restraining order and end the strike. Its 11,500 members will now vote on whether to approve a 3-year deal that offers pay rises and protection around use of artificial intelligence. However, a separate dispute involving actors who are also on strike remains. The writers' walkout began on 2nd of May, which members of the Screen Actors Guild joined on the 13th of July, making it the longest strike to affect Hollywood in decades. They were striking in a row over pay and the use of artificial intelligence in the industry. It has cost the U.S. economy around $5 billion.
Very excited. Obviously, we're very excited after 140 some odd days out here trying to secure a decent contract. To hear that our leadership and negotiating committee are happy with the terms that have been presented is really wonderful news. We were just discussing how between that moment and the ratification, we need to be extremely vigilant to make sure everything that we're asking for actually says what it means in the contract, and SAG should follow suit.
I hear it's an exceptional deal, and historically, whatever deal they give to one union, the next union kind of uses as a template for their own deal.
Surprising, you know, it was elating, but we've been out here for so long, it's almost hard to believe. But what it does show is that once the AMPTP took it seriously, they could get this done in 4 days. We didn't need the other 142, so it's wonderful. Now we just got one down, one to go.
I think this is a huge win, not just for the entertainment industry specifically, but also like labor unions all across America. You know, can be a feeling that workers have very little power in the face of giant corporations, but these strikes have proven that that's not true, that we actually have huge collective, you know, bargaining power, and that when we get together, you know, anything is possible. So yeah, it feels great.
The 78th General Assembly of the United Nations has officially ended, but has been described as a summit of hope. Those were UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed's words after the meetings. She says more than 500 leaders and partners took part in the meetings on SDGs, the Climate Action Ambition Summit, and other major meetings on women's rights, civil society, business, health, and science. The goal of the summit was to get the SDGs, a global to-do list created in 2015 that pledges to leave no one behind on track. World leaders met in the shadow of geopolitical tensions, largely fueled by the war in Ukraine, as Russia and China vie with the United States and Europe to win over developing countries where the goals are key.
For the SDG part of this, it was a summit of hope. I think that we have still managed to give that to the many out there and to message that. We've got 7 years to get the SDGs. We did say all the way through this that, you know, this is done in the second half. Many quoted that, and many have come back to us to say next steps, and many, of course, are already continuing with that as they go back. We got, of course, world leaders and many partners, over 500 partners that came into the UN to mark the halfway point. They joined us not just for the SDG Summit, but also the Action Weekend, where we try to bring stakeholders in across the spectrum, from women to civil society, business, science, all came through the doors. We had the Climate Action Ambition Summit and other major meetings that happened on health, the 3 there. We tried to ensure that we brought solutions to the gaps that were very clear from our report, and to create greater momentum and commitment, and to see if we could bring those synergies together with the many stakeholders that came through. We centered a lot of this around 6 transitions, in addition to gender equality and the means of implementation. Essentially, our barriers to getting to the SDGs have been the means of implementation: finance, technology, trade, but those 6 transitions for us were important as they looked at energy and food systems, the digital piece, but also the climate, the triple climate crisis that we have.
Welcome back. France's ambassador in Niger Republic, Sylvain Ite, has honored President Emmanuel Macron's instruction to leave the country after the ruling junta ordered his expulsion. This comes after weeks of protests and sit-in demonstrations by Nigerians at the French airbase in the capital Niamey, calling for the withdrawal of French troops and the ambassador. President Macron had said last weekend the ambassador would leave within days and its troops will withdraw by the end of the year. And in another development, the United States has announced plans to halt aid to Gabon following military takeover of power last month in that country as well. In a statement, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was quoted as saying, "We are pausing certain foreign assistance programs that benefit the government of Gabon while we evaluate the unconstitutional intervention by members of the country's military. The decision to suspend aid to Gabon will remain while we review the facts on the ground." The statement adds that the decision was in line with actions taken by the Central African Bloc, the African Union, and other world leaders following the coup d'etat. However, it noted that operational base of activities are continuing in Gabon, including diplomatic and consular operations to support U.S. citizens there. And a Rwandan court has denied bail to 34-year-old Denis Kazungu, the man who confessed to committing 14 murders in Kigali. Mr. Kazungu faces multiple charges, including murder, rape, forgery, and desecration of human corpses. According to the judge, Mr. Kazungu had failed to show remorse or seek forgiveness for his alleged crimes. Even though he pleaded guilty, he is to be in custody for 30 days. The suspect was arrested earlier this month after his landlord reported him for defaulting on his rent for 7 months. We'll talk about help from Africa. That's what Kenya is offering Haiti to deal with its gang violence. Gangs have largely overpowered police in Haiti and are now in control of more than 3/4 of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Kenyan officials had initially offered to send around 1,000 officers to Haiti to train local police and help protect the country's key installations there. The Foreign Minister, Alfred Mutua, says it'll be an intervention force to disarm what he called the thugs and the gangs. It's an offer that has been commended by the US, Canada, and the United Nations. Some rights groups are, however, concerned about the deployment, citing accusations of human rights violations by the Kenyan police force.
Unfortunately,
And China is still in celebration mode as it counts down to its 74th National Day on October 1st. Speaking at a reception marking the event, the Consul General Yan Yuten commended the good and cordial relations the country enjoys with Nigeria, which also celebrates her independence anniversary on October 1st. The celebrations were attended by members of the Chinese community in Nigeria, the diplomatic corps, representatives of the Confucius Institute in Nigeria, government officials, and friends of China from far and wide.
Like many nations around the world, Independence Days are celebrated with features of culture and national pride. China's 74th in Lagos was no different. From use of the Chinese national language to the famous Chinese lion dance, all was on display to thrill guests into appreciating the Chinese and all they stand for. Consul General Yan Yuting welcomed everyone and extolled relations between China and Nigeria.
Nigeria is known as an ancient country with a history of thousands of years, which is similar to China. And its famous Nok, Ifi, and Benin cultures have earned it the reputation as the cradle of African culture. The flourishing cultural industries known as Nollywood have provided an important window for the world to get close to understand Nigeria. The new president of Nigeria, Mr. Bola Tinubu, has put forward the Renewed Hope Plan, which sheds light on all aspects of how to build a better Nigeria. The Nigeria people are hardworking, intelligent, and optimistic.
Abia State Governor Alex Oti, who was specially invited for the program, announced future partnerships with China in the state, including the construction of an industrial park.
In Abia, we have followed your footsteps, transforming everything that is possible to transform. In a few days, precisely on the 30th, Saturday, we are going to do groundbreaking for the first innovation and industrial park in Abia State. It is going to be sited in Owaza, where you have large deposits of oil and gas. One of the advantages of the industrial park is that there is going to be 24-hour supply of power. There's going to be a modular refinery, and a lot of manufacturing and industrial activities will happen there.
Representing the Lagos State Governor is the Secretary to the Governor, Mrs. Bimbola Salu Hundeyin, who expresses his goodwill and wishes for China at this time.
We commend the people of China for their incredible spirit that has continued to drive growth and development. Your outstanding and remarkable accomplishment in critical areas such as infrastructure, technological innovations, and aerospace technology, ecological development, etc., is most inspiring.
The festivities will continue over the weekend for many Chinese nationals in Nigeria, with parties, mooncakes, and more. Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News.
Alphabet's Google is celebrating its 25th anniversary. While the company was incorporated on September 4, 1998, it celebrates its anniversary on September 27. This started in 2005 and marks the date of an announcement about the number of pages Google was indexing. What started as a search engine company has morphed into a multinational technology company with divisions covering e-commerce, digital advertising, technology products, and more. The company was co-founded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin and is now a $1 trillion company led by current CEO Sundar Pichai. Well, here's a closing question for you. Would you eat food made from plastic? Or should I say plastic waste? But you get the picture. Well, some scientists think that's the future, as one biotechnologist has produced the world's first food made from plastic waste. Guess what that is? Vanilla ice cream. It was locked in a freezer in London. The ice cream is actually an art installation called Guilty Flavors by 27-year-old artist and designer Eleonora Ottolani, intended to change the way we think about plastic waste and what we are and are not prepared to eat. The process, developed by scientists in Edinburgh, harnesses the metabolic power of bacteria and enzymes to behave as eco-friendly factories to digest polythene and turn it into vanillin, the molecule that gives vanilla its flavor.
think it's interesting and necessary to start a debate, but also I really believe we should kind of explore this more. Like it's so impressive. When I started this project, it was just very science fiction, and I was only interested in the critical side, and you know, like pushing boundaries and trying to explore what actually is possible and what is not. But during the journey, it was already clear that some species did that. Some species are eating plastic, and some scientists are already looking into that. So why not? Like I think we really should look into that more.
Once you break down the plastics, in this case PET, once you break it down into its building blocks, we call those monomers, you can turn those into many, many different things. I wouldn't say we can turn them into anything else, because we're a little bit restricted as to the biological tools that we've got available to us to modify those monomers. So in the case of PET, we can make vanillin. We could also make various other molecules, and what those are is very much dictated by these enzymes that we can use, and there are certain enzymes which do certain chemical reactions. So if you plug those together, you can get through to lots of different chemical products. I think it's really important that we do get that message across to the public, because a lot of the comments I've had and the feedback I've had has been concern around this idea of eating something that comes from plastic. And you know, I've even had members of the public email me saying it's irresponsible to encourage people to eat plastic. And I think it's this thing that there's this perhaps misconception around what it actually is by the end of the process, that it is no longer plastic. But I think as part of that, it is really important that we take the safety side of it really, really seriously, and we make it very clear that this has to go through exactly the same regulatory process.
Well, that's news around the world this hour. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. Bye for now.